Welcome, welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest, Mr. Oram Miller. Oram Miller is a certified building biology environmental consultant and electromagnetic radiation specialist. He is the Director of Learning and Development for the Institute of Building Biology and Ecology, and is involved in curriculum development and teaching for EMF seminars taught by the Institute. He provides on-site healthy home and office EMF evaluations for clients throughout Southern California who have electromagnetic sensitivities, as well as those who want a healthier home or office. Oram Miller, welcome to the EMF Health Summit 2018.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure. It truly is a great pleasure to be speaking to you again. So you're an electromagnetic radiation specialist. You teach EMFs for the Institute of Building Biology and Ecology. So I guess you're the ideal person to ask, what are EMFs, electromagnetic fields, and just how dangerous are they?
All right. Thank you for that question. That's the most fundamental question of all. Electromagnetic fields encompass 4 specific types as far as the building biology profession is concerned. And of course, the profession that I am a part of, that I was trained and certified by here in the States for the US, for North America, was founded by a German building biologist from the original building biology profession, the IBN, and those are letters for German words. That is thriving and continuing to teach in Europe, but that was founded by Anton Schneider 35 or 40 years ago, 50 years ago. And Helmut Zia brought that knowledge to America more than 30 years ago and founded the Building Biology Institute here that certified me 30 years ago. We just had our 30th anniversary last October, and Helmut Zia passed away a few years ago of a stroke, but we honored him and his wife at that conference. So I've been doing this for 15 years, and we work with people who are sensitive to electromagnetic fields and those who are not, who are just health conscious. Those are the 2 groups that I work with primarily, and 60 to 70% of my clients are electrically hypersensitive. They know that about themselves, and 2/3 of them are symptomatic. So that's half my clientele. The other third of the original group, as I've mentioned to you before in previous interviews, are not sensitive or symptomatic to fields, but they're health conscious and they know about them. All right, so the 4 fields that we recognize in the building biology profession are AC 60 hertz magnetic fields, AC 60 hertz electric fields, radio frequencies, which includes all the Wi-Fi, smart meters, cell phones, cordless phones, Bluetooth, and then dirty electricity, which has an electric and a magnetic field component that are at right angles to each other, as is the case at 60 cycles per second, but at higher harmonic frequencies that are multiples of a fundamental frequency like 60 hertz. So, and you can see right away that this is a little technical, and one must try and remember one's physics if you took that in college, or be willing to learn a little bit of physics to understand this, because there's a lot of confusion, as we were just talking about before we started taping. There is a lot of misunderstanding out there, and that's not anybody's fault. It's just because it's a very complex subject, and it has nuances that need to be understood in order to differentiate between them. So,
yes.
So I can go into a little detail about these fields if you like.
Yes, please do.
Okay, all right. So the first 2 are so we have the magnetic field component and the electric field component. So when we talk about electric fields or magnetic fields, those are the M of the EMF and the E of the EMF. So I have clients who watch me work. I sit down at the beginning of my evaluations of a home, which can take 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, depending on how many bedrooms there are, how many people live there, and how many questions come up. And the first hour is spent sitting at the kitchen table going over what EMFs are, where they come from, how they affect your health, and what we do about them. So with that knowledge, that client has more understanding of EMFs than the average electrician or government regulatory, or physician. And with that knowledge, we go around the house and we take EMF readings, all four: electric fields, magnetic fields, both of them are from house wiring, radio frequencies, all the Wi-Fi and such, and then dirty electricity, in all the places that people sit, sleep, and stand. So where the bedrooms are, where the family room is, or the kitchen, the places that people frequent. And we're looking for indoor sources and outdoor sources that come into the home for each of these fields. And so a lot of people, they'll have me go around, they'll accompany me, and we'll look for the Wi-Fi, we'll look for electric fields where people sleep, which is something that most people don't know about, but it's very common. And then we'll do all that and dirty electricity. And they'll say, well, now I want you to check the EMFs. And what they mean is the magnetic fields, but they don't realize that they're all EMFs at different frequencies, or the first two are at 60 cycles, and in Europe at 50 cycles per second. But so the point is, what I say to my clients is, what you know from reading these great websites from various people in the EMF safety community, the larger EMF safety community, what most people know about are dirty electricity, and not necessarily in this order, but for many decades, a lot of people know about dirty electricity, probably more than anything else. And that's thanks to Dave Stetzer and Martin Graham, and also Dr. Sam Millam, who wrote the book Dirty Electricity, and they've worked together for decades, and we know them. And so we give them a great deal of credit for bringing to everyone's attention the fact that these harmonics of dirty electricity, these voltage transients, come off of wires, circuits in your home, and wires that you plug into rooms that affect your health, whether you feel it or not, on a cellular level. And they're from many different sources that didn't exist before 50 years ago or so. We're talking about electronics primarily, variable speed motors, these energy efficient furnaces, front load washing machines, and then electronic dimmer switches, compact fluorescent bulbs that have these chip-based transformers in their base. LEDs are cleaner these days, but compact fluorescents are not. Dimmers are a big source. And even the switch mode power supplies in some of these transformers that you put into the wall, like Apple is using them instead of the old coil transformers that don't produce dirty electricity, but they're switching over to switch mode power supplies. It's a lighter transformer, and there's no coil of wire in there like in the old days. But the switch mode power supply, which changes 120 volts here in America and Canada, North America, and 240 volts in Europe, where you are, Lloyd, to the 6 volts or whatever to run the circuit board of the electronics or charge your phone. And that, in the process of stepping down the voltage, dirty electricity is generated. And that goes back up the line. It goes down the line and back up the line, particularly upstream on the hot wire all the way to the panel. So if you have a dirty electricity source downstream from you, you're going to get that field coming off of the wire that you're sitting near within a few feet, coming through the wall from the cord from the wire in the wall and the cords you plug in. So anyway, I could go on about dirty electricity, but it's something that must be considered, and we eliminate the sources or reduce them as much as people are willing to do. A lot of people don't want to give up their dimmer switches, but we say, hey, these are not healthy for you. And the compact fluorescent lights, they're getting cleaner with LEDs. There are clean dimmers that you can get from, they cost more, but they are available. There are certain manufacturers of solar panel inverters that are cleaner, like Sunny Boy from Germany and SMA. They're the same company, I believe, that are cleaner because they know about that. They designed their inverter to be cleaner, but it's not clean, it's just cleaner. So if you're electrically hypersensitive, you have no business thinking about solar panels as far as I'm concerned. I have too many people who are sensitive and they've got solar panels and now they can't live in their house, or they have to shut the thing off, and they've wasted all that investment. So anyway, that's my professional opinion about that. So, okay, dirty electricity then are these harmonics, and dirty electricity has an electric field component and a magnetic field component, and they're both there. Now, it turns out that so when people learn about EMFs, what they're going to learn about, as I mentioned, are dirty electricity. Then there are three more things that people see on websites from within the EMF community. And the second thing that's very popular is all the wireless, including 5G, which is 5th generation cell protocols, which we can talk about a little later.
I'd like to ask you about that afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. And then Wi-Fi, cell phones, smart meters. smart electric meters, smart utility meters in general, electric, gas, and water. So that's all in the category of wireless devices. That's the second thing. Third thing is chips and pendants, which I know you want. We can talk about that as well.
Yes.
And then the fourth thing is the earthing mats.
Yes.
And everything I'm telling you, by the way, is my opinion, based on my experience and the experience of the building biology profession, for which I teach, and I'm the director of learning and development for the Building Biology Institute here in America, and I founded and run the apprenticeship program to match our building biology electromagnetic radiation students with experienced practitioners in the U.S. and Canada, so they can get some practical experience when they go home. Okay, so those are the 4 EMFs that most people know about.
Yeah.
Now, we add 2 more to that, and those are electric fields at 60 hertz or 50 hertz from the power company, electric fields that come 6 to 8 feet or 2 meters into the room, right through the wall, from the hot conductor of your circuit in the wall, the plastic circuit that's in the wall, and the cord that you plug in by your bed, producing this field that comes out and then collapses, comes out and collapses 60 times a second, very fast, and it disrupts the physiology, especially when you're trying to sleep. So we'll go into that. And then the other one is magnetic fields. So we have the electric fields and magnetic fields that come from current flowing down a wire. But fortunately, the magnetic field that comes on the hot wire that goes clockwise, the flux field, if you remember your physics, goes clockwise, called the right-hand rule. If my thumb is pointing in the direction behind me of a hot wire, if I had a wire here that a circuit that had a hot wire going behind me to a light over there, and then the electricity goes through the light and comes back on the neutral wire, and so therefore it comes beside the hot. They're side by side. In America, it's black for the hot, white for the neutral. They're in the same circuit. There's a field that goes clockwise around the hot wire if you're going that way, because that's the way the right-hand fingers go. I have my thumb pointing over my shoulder, and so my right-hand fingers depict the direction of the field around the hot wire. But for the neutral wire, I have to turn my thumb over, my palm over, and now my thumb is pointing towards the camera, and now my fingers are going counterclockwise. So you have these 2 fields that are going in opposite directions around, these wires. Now, if you have knob and tube wiring from the 1920s and 30s, they're separated, and you lose your cancellation, and you have magnetic fields in the room when you turn lights on.
Yes.
If you have overhead power lines, you have wires that are separated because they don't have any insulation. They don't want them to knock together and arc or trip the breaker at the substation. So they keep them apart 6 or 8 feet, and there's no cancellation of the field. That's why you have a big magnetic field coming down to the houses below. So when they insulate them and put them together, then they cancel. So in circuits in your walls and in the cords that you plug in for your lamps, the hot and neutral are together. And so those fields superimpose and cancel unless they're unequal. And that's what happens with a wiring error. And wiring errors have to do with incorrectly configured neutrals. If you have 2 circuits coming into the same junction box that go to different lights, those neutrals have to be separated, just like the hots are separated. If the neutrals are together, then the current that comes back from any one light can go back both ways instead of the way it's supposed to. Mm. And so you have unbalanced loads for that portion of the circuit from there back to the panel for each one of those 2 circuits coming in. And you can get magnetic fields when the lights go on, but those can be fixed. And with so-called ARC fault breakers, which are now code required in the US, as well as in your country where you live, Laurent Height, an electrician and EMF person in France, who comes here to Santa Monica, California, near Los Angeles, where I live, every year. So we meet each other, and he says, Oram, I don't have any wiring errors in any of the homes that I work on or go to in France, because we have these breakers, 8 breakers with a ground fault interrupter circuit at the end of them, and they snap in place on all the breaker panels for the last decades in France. And those trip the minute you turn them on the first time as an electrician wiring up the house if you have a wiring error. So there are no wiring errors in any homes in France.
No, and also in France, well, electrical work needs to be carried out by a licensed electrician, whereas what I heard from one of my previous guests who was in New York, for instance, he was saying, well, anybody can do electrical work, just anybody that wants to, really. They're taking on people, you know, New York's an expensive place as well, so people that maybe don't have the money to do this, then, you know, they're not taking on qualified electricians.
Well, okay, it's true to a point. Now, my understanding, if any building is being built new, it has to be permitted.
Yes.
It's the remodeling where it gets a little loose, because technically most cities have, unless you're out in the country,
Yes.
but in rural areas, they don't have this requirement necessarily. It's a budgetary issue for the city, or for the, you know, the municipality there. But in any suburb or city, there'll be there's an electric code department of the building and safety, and you have to pull a permit, or they want you to. And, you know, some people don't, for remodeling, and then anybody can do the work. But as far as new construction, it's all permitted and has to be done by a licensed electrician. However, the problem is the code inspectors don't look for these issues. They don't look for wiring errors because they don't think that the magnetic fields are of concern. They're taught that they're not, and so they don't look for them. And I even said to some electricians, why is this code even why is this provision in the code that you're not supposed to mix neutrals? And Carl Riley, Carl with a K, his book Tracing EMFs in Building Wiring and Grounding is really the acknowledged to be the guru of this in North America. And so what I'm told is that it's there to avoid a very rare source of fire if you overload the neutral, and also it can harm the electrician when they're doing some troubleshooting work. And it causes magnetic fields. They know that. And they say that the reason you don't want to have that is because it affects sensitive electronic equipment like computer servers and monitors. And I've seen this. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what about human health?
Exactly.
No, we don't consider that. Yeah. Because, you know,
we're protecting machines and appliances more than we're protecting humans, it seems. But that's a really great overview of what EMFs are and these various categories. And there's something you said there, which I just want to highlight, is that EMFs affect your health whether you feel it or not. And that we just got a highlight in red and yellow, and because this is a major point, isn't it? And the only reason I'm talking about this is because I began to feel the EMFs, and unfortunately, well, it's kind of, for me, it was, oh my God, you know, how am I going to continue functioning in it was the 20th century at the time, but, you know, in this modern world. And I realized subsequently it was a blessing in disguise, because most people aren't aware of this. So you're aware of this because this is your job, but most people aren't aware of this. And so people, you know, that become electrically sensitive, they become aware like that in a big way, kind of a bulldozer effect, bolt from the blue. But then 99.9% of the population are not aware, but we're still affected by these exposures. And that's what I want to ask you is about the dangers, just very briefly, because, okay, so you're an EMF expert, specialist. You're not a doctor, but just a word on the dangers as you see it, because you're out in the field and you're seeing stuff, and I'm sure you're going in, you're doing your stuff, and you're coming away, and people are, it's, you know, it must be almost miraculous. I mean, I've heard these stories before, but yeah, just a word about the dangers and how your work impacts people.
So that's really at the heart of the matter. And it turns out that there are many people who are affected by this. The researchers around the world are actually saying that with cell phones, for instance, Martin Blank, who just passed away, unfortunately, the professor, a retired professor from Columbia University in New York, who wrote the book Overpowered, he said he was a skeptic until he did his own research. And then he found all these problems. And in his retirement years, he became a champion of this and tried to let everyone know that there are issues. So what he found in his research, as I recall, and I don't know if you've interviewed.
I have, yes.
Okay. Is that when you hold a cell phone here for any extended length of time, or even a short amount of time, there is damage to the DNA. And David Carpenter, of the Bioinitiative Working Group with Cindy Sage, says the same thing, that there's, and Martin Paul, the guy at Washington State University on the West Coast here with his calcium channel, voltage-gated calcium channel issues, you all know about that. And it turns out that when you hold a cell phone here, there's fragmentation of the DNA. And so Martin Blank, Dr. Blank always used to say that 100% of cells are affected on a DNA level in the mitochondria and all the other cellular components from the use of cell phones. Now, the problem is 2/3 of the population, according to these researchers, him and others in Europe, they say 2/3 of the population can repair the damage sufficiently that they never go on to develop symptoms, at least not in the near term. 1/3 cannot repair the damage. So they have symptoms. So that means that 1/3 of the population who uses cell phones, and that's probably 95% of the population worldwide, even in poor countries, are having this effect and don't know about it. 1/3 of the population, that's a very large percentage. Now, 3 to 5% have these, have electrical hypersensitivity and know it, and they inform their doctors about that. But all these other people, up to 1/3 of the population, that's a lot of people, have symptoms. They go to their physicians or their alternative healthcare practitioners who are more inclined to know about this. But physicians, with all due respect, they don't have any training in this. And in North America, at least, and probably in Europe, they're told, there's no problem here. It's all fine. There's no research that indicates any harm. Well, that's not true. There are thousands of studies that show harm. So the most important thing, as far as we're concerned, as building biologists, based on our experience in the US, Canada, and around the world, is that there are many people who we work with who are aware of and paying attention to the very necessary and important information that they get from the websites throughout the EMF safety community. And all of the information there is very important about dirty electricity, the wireless, 5th generation cell phones, earthing mats, and chips and pendants. But in addition, so they've done everything right. They're turning off their Wi-Fi at night. They're opting out of their smart meter when they can. They're putting dirty electricity filters throughout the house. They're using chips and pendants, earthing mats, and many of them are feeling better. Many. There are others who call us who are still having some symptoms. And what we find is that there are electric fields and magnetic fields that are present that when we take care of those, which is what we focus on, along with radio frequencies and dirty electricity, all 4 of those, in the building biology profession, then we've got everything covered. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these people find that they feel better, even electrically sensitive people who improve to a certain degree with these technologies that I just mentioned. But then when we add the electric field and magnetic field component, then they really improve.
Yeah.
So just in brief, if I may, electric fields are what I call the unknown EMF. They're the E of the EMF, and I didn't mention, but at the frequency of house wiring in the world, whether it's 50 cycles per second, 240 volts, as in Europe and other parts of the world, or 60 cycles per second and 120 volts over here in North America, and I think in the whole Western Hemisphere, meaning the North and South America. Either one, you have the magnetic field component and the electric field component. And what I mean by that is when you have a wire and you have the magnetic field around it, the magnetic field is defined as a circular motion of this flux field around it, which dissipates in intensity as you move away from the wire. Let's say this pen is a wire, and then so you have like spokes of a wheel coming off. For any given vector, you have a corresponding vector that's at right angles to it, which is the electric field component, because electric fields also come off of wires in all directions. And so imagine that there's one vector of that. Well, its corresponding vector of magnetic fields is at 90 degrees. The issue is, are they coupled or are they separate? At the frequent, and so that has to do with whether you're within the near field or far field. I don't mean to get technical here, but it's important to understand this. In the near field, which is within 3 wavelengths of any given frequency that causes electromagnetic fields, in the near field, the electric field and magnetic field component are completely uncoupled, and you can have one without the other. And that's true for house wiring anywhere in the world. And because the wavelength for 50 or 60 cycles per second is 3,100 miles and however many meters or kilometers. That's like literally from California to New York. Not that the field goes that far from a house here in California, but that the waveform would take that long to finish itself if you could see it. So what this means is, since we're all, and 3 times that is, you don't get into the far field where they couple, where they're like this, until you get 3 times that. Now that's true in radio frequencies, because those wavelengths are anywhere from 5 to say a foot, 13 inches for 900 megahertz, which is the frequency for smart meters. And so that means that if your smart meter is, or cell phones, they use 800 megahertz, 900 megahertz, 1800, 1900. If you have a smart meter and you want to measure that with your radio frequency detector, most of the radio frequency meters on the market today have far field antennas. They're accurate in the far field, and the far field starts 3 wavelengths. Well, if the wavelength for a smart meter at 900 megahertz is 13 inches, 3 times that is 3 feet. So you shouldn't be measuring a smart meter closer than 3 feet. You can for dramatic effect, but you can't pay attention to the number because it's not accurate, because you're in the near field and these are far field antennas. The accuracy starts at 3 wavelengths, which is 3 feet for 900 megahertz, because one wavelength is 13 inches. Okay. So then you measure at 3 feet and then 8 feet. That's what we do when we're comparing smart meters.
Yes.
Okay. So, so when it comes to house wiring, the electric field and magnetic field components are always completely independent of one another. That means, here's the practical takeaway from what I just said. If you have a Gauss meter that only measures magnetic fields and it doesn't measure electric fields, and you go into a sleeping area and you turn it on and you see, oh, it's 0.5 milligauss. Well, that's good. Those of you who know this, that's good because that's below 1 milligauss. Or it's 50 nanotesla in Europe. Oh, that's good because it's below 100 nanotesla. We generally agree that 1 to 2 milligauss or 100 to 200 nanotesla is safe. And then you say, well, there are no EMFs here, let's move on. You have missed the electric field, which is always present in bedrooms worldwide, from the electric field that comes 6 or 8 feet out from the wire and then collapses and comes out and collapses. And it does that because the sine wave goes up and down. Here's the 0 crossing point. And so the sine wave has a positive half and then a negative half. And that's one cycle. And then a positive half and a negative half. So the field comes out with a positive polarity, 6 or 8 feet, 2 meters, and collapses. And comes out with a negative polarity, 2 meters, or 6 or 8 feet, and collapses. This is happening all night long, 50 to 60 times a second. And what happens is the sleeping body, in the proximity of these wires, these circuits that are in the walls by your head, or on the wall on the side, under the floor, underneath you, the cord that comes down from the nightstand, even when the light's off, the pressure is still there. Just like when you turn on a garden hose, with a garden hose, you turn it on, you have 80 pounds of pressure filling that hose with water pressure up to the nozzle, but there's no flow because you haven't squeezed the nozzle yet. That's like turning on the breaker, but you haven't turned the light on yet. When you squeeze that nozzle, 80 pounds of pressure causes that water to shoot out, and you feel the kick in your hand because of that, just like turning on the light. But when you turn the light off, you think that there's nothing there in the cord anymore, but that's not true. Because when you let go of the nozzle, you feel the kick in your hand because there's 80 pounds of pressure right there up to your hand, filling this hose still with pressure. In the same way, the lamp cord has voltage in it, in that plastic cord on the hot wire, all the way to the switch at the bottom of the bulb at the top of the lamp stem, and on the circuits that are in the wall. So this field still comes out whether the light's on or off. It has to do with voltage, not current. Yeah. So electric fields come from voltage. And the only way to get rid of that is to shut off you guys in England or in Europe have a shut-off switch at your outlets. We don't in America. But even if you did that, I just worked with a lady yesterday who was from Finland, but she lives in London, and she's here in Los Angeles, and she was having difficulty. And she brought over her earthing mat and plugged it in and had this adapter to go from the European plugs to American plugs, but there was no ground on it. So she was laying on a sheet, an earthing mat that was ungrounded, which expands the antenna that your body is. And she was getting worse electric field exposure effects because of the earthing mat, thinking she was helping herself because it was floating, it was ungrounded. You have to ground that thing. And the other thing, just to finish this thought about earthing mats, is the building biology profession in Germany has said for decades that that when you have electric fields coming into the room from plastic wires, there is many people who are electrically sensitive report that they feel an agitating buzzing effect in their body when they're laying on an earthing mat. And the speculation from the German building biologists is that there's some kind of pathway for the electric fields in the room to go into their body. Now, the earthing people here in California don't agree with that, and I need to talk to them about that in more detail, but because I think we can clear this up. But that's what the German building biologists say. That's what the engineers in the building biology profession here in America say. And that's what we hear from our electrically sensitive clients. So what we do in the building biology profession here is teach our students to reduce the electric fields anyway, whether the client has an earthing mat or even knows about that or not.
Yes.
So back to the electric fields. This is the missing link for a lot of people. I have so many people, Lloyd, and I told you this before, who call me up and they say, I'm not sleeping well. And it has to be because of the smart meter, because that's what they're reading about.
Yes.
But I've opted out because you can do that here in California. So it has to be the smart meter of my neighbor over there, because that's all they know about. I just nod my head and we measure the radio frequency out in the yard and in the room, and it's not that high. And that's a whole nother story, that the smart meter does come out far, but it's at a relatively low level, and the radio frequency devices that people have in their homes are much stronger. So those have to be dealt with as well. But back to the electric fields. So I just nod my head and say, okay, let's look at other EMFs that you have. I say, let's just do this test. It's part of our protocol that you asked me to check your EMF, so we're going to do this. And I show them which breakers to shut off, put little colored dots there. And I get an email the next morning, I slept well for the first night last night in this house. You were right. It wasn't the smart meter of my neighbor that was causing my insomnia. It was this electric field. Now, how come I don't know about this?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that we add, and we encourage people to pay attention to this because it's so common. And a lot of people have said it's the missing link for them. Then in addition to that, in the daytime, if you put your hands on a laptop that has a 2-prong plug instead of a 3-prong plug, you're missing the grounding and you're going to have sky-high electric fields, and you're not going to know why you feel so tired when you put your hands on the computer for even a few minutes, let alone a few hours. So you must ground your computer, and there are multiple ways to do that. My website is www.createhealthyhomes.com. Homes is plural, all one word, createhealthyhomes.com. Click on safer use of computers, and I have a whole article there breaking it down by magnetic fields, electric fields, radio frequencies, and electricity. And I talk about this grounding issue in the electric field section.
Yes.
And then you have wiring errors and current on water pipes in America, at least, copper water pipes that carry a current because that's a path for lightning to get into the earth. And the code requires that you have a bond wire from your breaker panel to the water pipe, which you need to maintain shock protection for occupants in terms of fault, so that the breaker shuts off, and other safety reasons for the wiring, so you don't get a fire or have the building catch on fire from the wiring. But also in case of a lightning strike, you need this path to get electricity voltage, high volts from lightning into the earth. So we have an earth rod now, but before 60 years ago, we didn't. The water pipe under the front yard was and continues to be a major earthing path. However, that water pipe connects to the water main, and so every house is connected to every other house in terms of this parallel path for return current to get back to the transformer for the neighborhood. So 5, 10, 15% of return electricity goes on that path and not on the neutral of the electric service wires, service drop wires that come overhead. 2 wires coming in America, and then the neutral going back, and those 3 wires are together. The 2 black insulated wires are wound around the guy wire, which is a current carrying neutral, and it's also a ground. So we want that to be equal. If 8 amps comes in, we want 8 amps to go back. We don't want any amps to go another way, like out under the front yard. on the water pipe there, but you can have a half an amp, 1 amp, amp and a half, 2 amps on that path. So then there's a deficit out here and through the house underneath the basement, under the crawl space. So you get a magnetic field coming up into your house from current on this grounding path. And same thing with the TV cable. The sheeting of the TV cable can carry current. So we know, we teach our students to look for this and get rid of it. And then we have the whole package.